gunmetal pressed cold against her temple. "You betrayed the family, Victoria," the mob boss whispered, his thumb grazing the safety. Taylor squeezed her eyes shut. She was 80 pounds heavier than her twin, wearing a borrowed trench coat, and about to die for a sister she hadn't seen in years. Taylor Kensington lived a life measured in cups of flour and ounces of sugar. At 28, she was the proud owner of the Sweet Crumb, a modestly successful bakery tucked away on a rainy corner of Wicker Park in Chicago. Taylor was a woman who took up space, and after years of punishing diets, she had finally learned to own it. She was fat, soft-curved, and unapologetic, finding a quiet comfort in her thick thighs and round hips. It was a stark contrast to the ghost that haunted her family's past, her identical twin sister, Victoria. Victoria was everything Taylor wasn't: razor-thin, ruthless, wrapped in Prada, and entirely devoid of a conscience. 3 years ago, Victoria had severed all ties with her humble Midwestern roots, clawing her way up the social ladder until she married Lorenzo Falcone, the undisputed head of the Falcone crime syndicate in New York. Since then, Taylor had only seen her sister in tabloid clippings, usually looking glacial and untouchable behind oversized sunglasses, until the text message arrived on a freezing Tuesday night in November. "Help me. Alley behind your shop, 11 p.m. Come alone, or I'm dead." Taylor should have ignored it, but the primal bond of blood dragged her out into the sleet. When she stepped into the dimly lit alley, she barely recognized the woman shivering by the dumpsters. Victoria looked feral. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was matted, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, and her eyes wide with a frantic, animal terror. "Vicky," Taylor whispered, her breath blooming into white clouds in the freezing air. Victoria lunged forward, shoving a heavy scarlet wool coat and an oversized Hermes Kelly bag into Taylor's chest. "Put this on," Victoria hissed, her voice a rusted scrape. "Just for a second. I need to check the street, and I'm freezing." "Victoria, what kind of trouble are you in?" Taylor asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. She instinctively shrugged into the coat. It was tight, dangerously tight across Taylor's broad shoulders and generous chest, the buttons straining against her curves. "The kind you can't fix with a cupcake pen," Victoria sneered, a flash of her old cruelty piercing through the fear. "Stay right here." Victoria vanished into the shadows of the fire escape. Taylor stood there, clutching the ridiculous designer bag, shivering in the strained scarlet coat. She waited 1 minute, then 2. She didn't hear the engines until it was too late. 2 matte black SUVs screeched into the narrow alley, blocking both exits. The headlights pinned Taylor against the brick wall like a deer. 4 men piled out, moving with the terrifying, silent synchronization of professional predators. The leader, a towering man with a scarred jaw named Dante Rossi, a notorious enforcer for the Falcone family, marched straight toward her. "Get away from me!" Taylor screamed, taking a clumsy step back. Dante didn't even flinch. He grabbed her by the lapels of the straining scarlet coat, lifting her slightly onto her toes. He glanced at the Hermes bag, then at her face beneath the flickering yellow street lamp. To a stranger in the dark, the identical facial features were undeniable. "We got her," Dante barked over his shoulder. "Mrs. Falcone is secured." "Wait, no. You have the wrong person," Taylor thrashed, her heavy frame giving her a leverage Victoria never had. But Dante was made of granite. A damp cloth, reeking of a sickly sweet chemical, was clamped over her nose and mouth. Taylor fought, her nails clawing at Dante's leather gloves, but the darkness rushed in, swallowing her whole. When Taylor clawed her way back to consciousness, the harsh smell of sleet and garbage was gone, replaced by the scent of rich mahogany, expensive leather, and a faint hint of bergamot. She groaned, pushing herself up from a plush velvet sofa. Her head throbbed. She was in a cavernous library, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and heavy velvet drapes that blocked out whatever daylight existed outside. As her vision cleared, the terrifying reality of her situation crystallized. Sitting behind a massive oak desk, casually pouring a glass of amber liquid, was Lorenzo Falcone. He was breathtaking in the most terrifying way possible. Lorenzo possessed the kind of dark, brutal elegance that commanded absolute obedience. His tailored charcoal suit clung to broad shoulders, and his eyes, a striking, cold, late grey, locked onto her with a mixture of seething hatred and dark amusement. "I have to admit, Victoria," Lorenzo's voice was a deep, silken rumble that vibrated in Taylor's chest. "I expected you to run to Europe, Paris perhaps, or Milan. I never imagined you'd hide out in a squalid little apartment in Chicago for 2 years." Taylor opened her mouth to scream the truth. "I'm Taylor. I'm a baker. I don't belong here." But the words died in her throat as Lorenzo stood up, moving with the lazy grace of a hunting cat. He walked around the desk, his gaze raking over her body. The scarlet coat had been discarded, leaving Taylor in her own clothes, a simple black wrap dress that hugged her thick waist and full hips. "And I certainly didn't expect this," Lorenzo continued, his eyes trailing down her curves with an unreadable expression. "You've changed. Hiding in the Midwest added quite a bit of padding to that runway figure of yours. I suppose the stress of stealing $10 million from my syndicate made you turn to emotional eating?" Taylor's blood turned to ice. $10 million. Victoria hadn't just run away. She had robbed one of the most dangerous mafia bosses on the eastern seaboard. If Taylor told the truth right now, what would happen? Lorenzo was a man who murdered traitors for breakfast. If he knew she wasn't Victoria, she would become a useless pawn. Worse, he might torture her to extract Victoria's real location. In the mafia world, blood paid for blood. If the guilty party wasn't available, the family paid the price. She remembered a harsh lesson Victoria had taught her when they were teenagers dealing with schoolyard bullies. "Never show them your bleeding pen. You bare your teeth, and you act like you own the ground you stand on." Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Taylor buried the sweet, apologetic baker deep inside her soul. She tilted her chin up, channeling every ounce of her sister's venomous entitlement. She stood up, smoothing down her dress over her full hips, refusing to break eye contact. "The Midwest has excellent deep-dish pizza, Lorenzo," Taylor purred, forcing her voice to drop an octave to match Victoria's smoky drawl. "Sue me." Lorenzo stopped dead in his tracks. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his stoic features. The old Victoria, the one he had married, was wildly neurotic, obsessed with maintaining a size 0, and easily rattled when cornered. She would have been weeping on the floor by now, begging for her life. Instead, this woman stood before him, unapologetically soft and fiercely defiant. Lorenzo took a step closer, close enough that Taylor could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached out, his long fingers trailing dangerously near the curve of her jaw. "You're bolder," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. "And softer. But the money, Mia Mowgli, my wife, where is it?" "It's safe," Taylor lied smoothly, her heart threatening to crack her ribs. "And you won't see a single dime of it if you keep me locked in this dusty tomb." A dark, dangerous smile touched the corners of Lorenzo's mouth. "Welcome home, Victoria." For the next 48 hours, Taylor was a prisoner in the sprawling Falcone estate on Long Island. She was confined to the master suite, a gilded cage of white marble, silk sheets and bulletproof windows overlooking a private coastline. Surviving as Victoria was an exhausting psychological war. Taylor had to monitor every word, every gesture, and every reaction. The real Victoria was a tyrant, ruling the household staff with a manicured iron fist. Taylor learned this quickly when a terrified maid named Maria Consuelo entered the suite to bring her breakfast. Maria's hands shook so violently that the fine china teacup rattled against the saucer. When a few drops of hot coffee splashed onto the mahogany nightstand, Maria gasped, shrinking back as if expecting a physical blow. I am so sorry, Signora Falcone," Maria stammered, tears springing to her eyes. "Please, I will clean it immediately. Do not tell Mr. Falcone." Taylor's natural instinct was to leap out of bed, grab a towel, and help the poor woman clean it up while offering her a pastry. But she caught her own reflection in the vanity mirror. She was playing a ruthless mafia wife. "Leave it," Taylor snapped, though it physically pained her to use such a harsh tone. She forced herself to lean back against the pillows, crossing her arms over her chest. "Just leave the tray and get out, Maria. I have a headache." Maria blinked, shocked that she hadn't been fired or slapped, and scurried out of the room. Taylor buried her face in her hands, releasing a shaky breath. She hated this. She hated the fear she inspired, and she hated the opulent prison she was trapped in. But her biggest problem wasn't the staff. It was Lorenzo. He came to the suite every evening. He didn't touch her, but he stalked the perimeter of the room, observing her like a scientist studying a volatile new element. He noted everything. He noticed that she actually ate the rich meals the chef prepared, rather than pushing a single lettuce leaf around her plate. He noticed she didn't instantly reach for the Xanax in the medicine cabinet. On the third night, Lorenzo entered the suite holding a thick manila folder. He threw it onto the foot of the bed. Taylor, who had been reading a novel, carefully placed her bookmark down and eyed the folder. "What is this?" she asked, maintaining her haughty facade. "A little bedtime reading," Lorenzo said smoothly, leaning against the door frame and unbuttoning his suit jacket. "I had a chat with an old associate of yours down at the Brooklyn docks, Vincent Castellano. Does the name ring a bell?" Taylor's mind raced. Vincent Castellano. She had no idea who that was. "I know a lot of people, Lorenzo. You'll have to be more specific." "Vincent specializes in forging documents," Lorenzo explained, his eyes narrowing. "He claims that a week before you miraculously disappeared 2 years ago, you paid him $50,000 to create a comprehensive identity package. Passports, driver's licenses, social security numbers." Lorenzo walked to the edge of the bed and tapped the folder. "Go ahead, open it." With trembling fingers, Taylor reached for the folder and flipped it open. Inside were photocopies of a fake Illinois driver's license and a U.S. passport. The photo on the documents was Victoria, but the name printed next to it made Taylor's blood run cold. Taylor Kensington. A wave of nausea washed over her. Victoria hadn't just run away. She had planned to steal Taylor's entire life. Victoria had known Lorenzo would never stop hunting her, so her ultimate escape plan was to assume her twin sister's identity, effectively throwing Taylor to the wolves. The only reason it hadn't worked was because Victoria hadn't anticipated the 80-pound weight difference. Assuming Taylor's identity in person would have raised too many red flags if she didn't look the part. So Victoria had resorted to using Taylor as a physical decoy instead. Her own sister had deliberately framed her to take the fall for a $10 million theft. "You almost had a flawless exit," Lorenzo murmured, his voice dripping with venomous admiration. "Becoming your pathetic, fat sister. Disappearing into the boring oblivion of the Midwest. It was a good plan, Victoria. But I know my wife. You could never stomach living like a peasant for long." Taylor stared at the fake passport. The heartbreak, shattered into a million pieces, instantly reforming into something hard, sharp, and intensely furious. The sweet, forgiving Baker died in that exact moment. If Victoria wanted to treat her like collateral damage, then Taylor would survive this nightmare by any means necessary. She looked up at Lorenzo, her eyes blazing with a very real, very dangerous fire. "It was a backup plan, Lorenzo, nothing more." Lorenzo studied her face, seemingly satisfied by the raw anger in her eyes, mistaking her fury at Victoria for the ruthless edge of his wife. "Good," Lorenzo said softly, "because it's time to prove that your loyalties lie entirely with the family again." He reached into the waistband of his trousers at the small of his back and produced a sleek, black 9mm Beretta. He slammed it down onto the nightstand. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the quiet room. Taylor flinched, staring at the weapon. "What is that for?" "We finally caught the rat who helped you funnel the money out of our offshore accounts," Lorenzo stated casually, though his eyes were completely dead. "Our former accountant, Anthony Moretti. He's currently tied to a chair in the soundproof basement downstairs." Lorenzo leaned down, his face mere inches from Taylor's. She could smell the mint on his breath, mixed with the metallic scent of the gun. "You are going to walk down those stairs, Victoria," Lorenzo whispered, his voice an absolute command. "You are going to look Anthony in the eye, and you are going to put a bullet in his kneecap to prove that you are back where you belong. You owe me blood for the embarrassment you've caused this family." Taylor's lungs seized. "Shoot a man." "And if I refuse?" she managed to choke out, struggling to keep her voice from shaking. Lorenzo's hand moved, his large, calloused fingers wrapping gently around the back of her neck. It was an intimate, terrifying touch. "Then I will know that whoever this soft, curvy woman is sitting in my bed, she is of no use to me anymore. And I put the bullet in your head instead." He released her neck and picked up the gun, holding it out by the barrel. "Your choice, Miyakara, my dear. Lead the way." Taylor slowly reached out, her fingers wrapping around the freezing, checkered grip of the Beretta. It was heavier than she expected. She stood up, her black dress swishing around her legs, the weight of the gun anchoring her to this violent, twisted new reality. She was walking into the devil's den, and the only way out was to become the monster everyone believed her to be. The descent into the Falcone estate's basement felt like a march to the gallows. The air grew damp, smelling of copper and wet concrete. Taylor gripped the heavy black Beretta, her knuckles bone white. Lorenzo walked behind her, a silent shadow radiating deadly anticipation. In the center of the soundproof interrogation room sat Anthony Moretti. He was a balding man in a ruined Brooks Brothers suit, his face battered, blood crusting his split lip. When he saw Taylor, his eyes widened in absolute terror. "Victoria, please," Anthony begged, straining against the thick zip ties binding his wrists to the heavy steel chair. "I did what you asked. I transferred the funds to the Deltec bank accounts. You promised I'd be protected." Taylor stepped into the harsh glare of the overhead bulb. She raised the heavy gun, her hands shaking violently. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, watching her with cold, calculating slate-gray eyes. "Shoot him," Lorenzo commanded softly, his deep voice devoid of any warmth or mercy, a chilling reminder of exactly who and what he truly was in this unforgiving underworld. Taylor stared at Anthony, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was a baker, a simple woman who found joy in the warmth of her kitchen. Her hands were meant to knead dough, not shatter bones. But Victoria had condemned her to this nightmare. Victoria had thrown her to the ravenous wolves. Act like you own the ground you stand on. Taylor forced her trembling hands to steady. She aimed the barrel downward, exhaling slowly. She did not aim for the kneecap. She aimed slightly to the left, at the thick metal leg of the chair, just a fraction of an inch from Anthony's calf. With a sharp gasp, she squeezed the heavy trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed concrete space. The bullet struck the steel chair leg, sending a shower of bright sparks and a sharp ricochet, ping echoing through the room. Anthony screamed, violently jerking backward, a thin line of crimson appearing on his trousers where a hot metal splinter had grazed him. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "You missed." "I never miss, Lorenzo," Taylor lied, her voice surprisingly steady over the high-pitched ringing in her ears. She lowered the smoking gun, turning to face him fully. A shattered kneecap makes a man pass out from the shock. A grazing wound keeps him awake to answer questions. If he thinks I am sloppy and erratic, he will always be too terrified to lie. Lorenzo stared at her, the deep suspicion in his eyes slowly melting into a dark, predatory intrigue. He stepped closer, taking the gun from her trembling fingers. "You have become infinitely more interesting, Mia Mowgli," he murmured, his thumb brushing a stray lock of dark hair from her sweating forehead. Turning his attention back to the weeping accountant, Lorenzo's demeanor shifted to pure ice. "Deltec Bank, account numbers, now." As Anthony babbled a long string of digits, Taylor leaned against the cold concrete wall, trying to control her panicked breathing. She had bought herself time. But the relief was terribly short-lived when Anthony, desperate to save his own pathetic life, shouted a sudden revelation that froze the blood in Taylor's veins. "The money isn't enough for her, boss," Anthony gasped. "She is meeting Dante Rossi tonight at the Brooklyn shipyard. They are staging a coup. Victoria promised Dante your territory if he helps her eliminate you permanently." Lorenzo went rigid. Dante Rossi, his top enforcer, the man who had violently kidnapped Taylor. It all made horrifying sense now. Dante had not made a careless mistake in the dark. He had deliberately grabbed the wrong twin to give Victoria crucial time to execute her final strike against Lorenzo. Taylor realized with sickening clarity that Victoria was not running from Lorenzo anymore. She was coming to bury him. The midnight fog rolling off the East River was thick, biting, and relentlessly cold. Taylor stood on the damp wooden planks of Pier 42, swathed in a heavy black cashmere coat that Lorenzo had draped over her shoulders. The glittering skyline of Manhattan loomed in the distance, a beautiful distraction from the deadly trap unfolding on the docks. Lorenzo stood beside her, perfectly still. A suppressed rifle rested casually against his thigh. He was a creature of the dark, entirely in his element. The deep shadows of the shipping containers hid a dozen heavily armed men, waiting for his final signal. "Are you ready for this?" Lorenzo asked. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the chilling mist, his eyes scanning the perimeter with the calculated precision of an apex predator. He did not look at her, but his presence was a heavy anchor keeping her grounded. "She will not expect me," Taylor replied. She clutched the lapels of her thick coat, her heart hammering a rhythm against her bruised ribs. Bright headlights pierced the thick fog. A Maybach rolled onto the wet pier, coming to a halt 20 yards away from where Lorenzo and Taylor stood. The driver's door opened. Dante Rossi stepped out, his hand resting casually on the leather holster. A moment later, the rear passenger door swung open. Victoria stepped into the light. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the slick planks of the pier. She looked magnificent and lethal. She was dressed in a white trench coat that contrasted starkly with the dark night. Victoria fully expected to find Dante standing victorious over Lorenzo's corpse. Instead, she found her husband standing beside a woman who looked exactly like her, albeit much softer, noticeably rounder and braver. Victoria froze. Her perfectly manicured facade cracked. "What is this?" she demanded. "Dante, shoot him! Kill them both right now! I gave you a direct order!" Dante rapidly drew his weapon, moving with the speed of a seasoned killer. But before he could even raise the barrel, 3 distinct red laser sights painted his chest. He froze instantly, the blood draining from his face, and slowly dropped his heavy gun to the wet wood. Lorenzo's hidden men stepped out of the shadows simultaneously, their weapons raised, entirely surrounding the silver Maybach. "Your blind ambition always outpaced your intelligence, Victoria," Lorenzo said. His voice carried effortlessly over the lapping dark waves, chilling the air further. "You actually thought Dante could outsmart me. You thought throwing your pathetic sister to me would keep me distracted long enough to steal my city." Victoria sneered, her eyes locking onto Taylor with pure, unadulterated venom. "You stupid fat cow," she hissed maliciously, stepping forward until Dante put a hand out to stop her. "You were supposed to die in my place. It was the only useful thing you could have ever done with your pathetic, flower-covered life." The cruel words, designed to hurt and demean, no longer held any power. They only cemented Taylor's firm resolve. She stepped forward, purposefully leaving the safety of Lorenzo's imposing shadow. She was terrified, but she was no longer the frightened, apologetic baker from Chicago. She was a true survivor who had stared down a mob boss and lived. "You always thought you were smarter than absolutely everyone else, Vicky," Taylor said. Her voice rang clear, strong, and unwavering in the damp air. "But you forgot one crucial thing. You left me with the terrifying monster you were too weak to face, and I survived him." Lorenzo watched Taylor intently. His cold eyes gleamed with a newfound, terrifying devotion. He had spent 3 miserable years married to a vain, empty, treacherous shell. But the strong woman standing beside him now, fiercely protective, remarkably clever, unapologetically curved, and completely unyielding, was a true queen of the underworld. "Take Dante to the downtown warehouse," Lorenzo commanded his armed men, without looking away from Victoria's panicked, pale face. "And as for my treacherous former wife, securely tie her to the heavy anchor chain of the rusted freighter." Victoria shrieked, kicking and fighting violently as 2 massive men grabbed her tightly by the arms. "Lorenzo, no, please, you cannot do this to me. I am your wife." "I am doing absolutely nothing to my wife," Lorenzo said smoothly. He stepped up right behind Taylor, resting a heavy, possessive, warm hand firmly on her soft, curved hip. "My beautiful wife is standing right here." Victoria's desperate, agonizing screams slowly faded into the thick fog as she was dragged away. Her ultimate fate sealed in the dark, icy depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Taylor watched her twin sister go, a complex, heavy knot of grief and immense relief tightening painfully in her chest. She had lost a treacherous sister tonight, but she had unexpectedly gained a vast, dangerous empire. Lorenzo slowly turned Taylor to face him. He looked down into her wide, frightened eyes, gently brushing a stray, salty tear from her soft cheek, with a touch that completely belied his brutal, violent nature. The baker was gone. The Queen remained. "Taylor Kensington is dead," Lorenzo murmured softly, sealing the dark vow with a passionate, intense kiss that tasted of sweet danger, metallic rain, and absolute power. Long live Victoria Falcone. She knew her old life was forever erased, replaced entirely by shadows, wealth, and blood. She was finally ready to rule now. Did you completely love this thrilling mafia romance drama? The incredible story of Taylor's dangerous transformation from a sweet, quiet baker to a ruthless underworld queen proves that true power always comes from surviving the darkest storms. If this intense tale of brutal betrayal, mistaken identity, and dangerous love kept you absolutely on the edge of your seat today, please hit that like button, share this amazing video with your friends, and subscribe to our awesome channel right now.